People asked me, I was in the military for many years, and I was like, I called the wrong phone number.
But when you are looking for a role, you should be spending as much time interviewing the organization as they are spending interviewing you. It also is about the types of people you want to spend your day talking to.
You have to actually know who you are. You got to come in not only with confidence, more importantly, competence. A lot of people don't have the competence to do the work that's set before them. And
Called Charity has two purposes. One is to give rich ladies something to do, and the other one is to give younger rich ladies an opportunity to climb the social ladder. There's very few nonprofit organizations that have accomplished their mission.
hi everyone, Delisa here, Faith in Sparkle's World, and welcome to another episode of the Conscious Leader Podcast, where I interview guests who are consciously leading their industry. They're there to impact and influence lives positively so that we as a collective can go to the next level as well as the individual. Today I have a very special guest with me. Her name is Mariya Yurukova, and she has an incredible gift for helping nonprofits. But instead of having me explain who she is and what she does, I would just like to welcome Mariya to the stage. Hi, Mariya. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Please share with the audience who you are, who you serve, and how you are positively impacting and influencing lives in the nonprofit industry.
Thank you. I mean, this is sort of why we exist. So my name is Mariya Yurukova. I am the CEO of an organization called Charity Search Group. And CSG is an executive search and talent recruitment firm that specializes in helping nonprofits find talented leaders. And so sort of a lot of the work that we do is really focused on small and medium-sized nonprofits that don't always have access to a lot of bells and whistles when it comes to recruitment. So they come to us when they're looking for a new leader, or they have a critical role to their organization and they need a different approach, and they need someone to sort of guide the process. And one of the reasons why I'm in this business, and sort of the reason why I love my job, is because I get to talk to people who are passionate about a very wide range of causes and really care about improving the human condition more broadly. And sometimes that means that we're working with a local arts and community center that does a lot of art programming for children, for example, or we're working with a national organization like the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention that really is hoping to save lives in a broader scale across all 50 states. So, and then anything in between. And I think it never ceases to amaze me sort of the work that nonprofits do, and sort of the various causes and the way that they try to improve their communities in very many different ways.
Wow, I am enjoying this conversation already because I know there's so much richness and value that we're going to receive just from having you on here and what you're sharing, as well as for the audience who are perhaps like saying, how do I support? How can I participate? And or, hey, how can I come to be part of your team in terms of being a executive director at a organization? Before we get started and ask this question, the other questions, I want to know, why nonprofit? What touched your heart to say, this is the way that I'm going to walk?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk to a lot of folks in the nonprofit space, they'll tell you that they sort of fell into it. One of the reasons why we have so many issues with talent in the nonprofit space is because there isn't really a natural pipeline of talent. So very few people go to school to be a nonprofit professional. Now, we already have some certificates, some master's programs. There's a few schools that have an undergraduate program in nonprofit management. Those are fairly new, and very small. The nonprofit space sort of has literally exploded in the last 25 years, and that's not always a good news. We have to be mindful of that nonprofits fill a gap in society that is not taken care of by government or enterprise, right? And so when there's so much need out there, and increasingly so, there's so many opportunities to be in the nonprofit space. Now, it has a whole bunch of challenges that we can get into that makes talent a little bit precarious. But for me, I accidentally fell into the nonprofit space when I was a student in university. And I was accidentally looking for a summer job, and I ended up in the job where we were raising money for scholarships. And so I did that, and sort of, I wasn't even quite sure if I was going to last and then I was going to take interest in it. But fast forward a few years later, I remember raising money for like an upgrade in the library that we were doing at the time, which was going to turn sort of the first floor of the library from like your typical like aisles of bookshelves and whatnot into sort of, at the time they were calling it a learning commons, but essentially a large space where people can gather and exchange ideas and do group study work and all that kind of stuff. So on my uh, sort of last day of school, just as I was about to graduate university, that whole space got renovated and opened up. And they had a wall of names of people who had donated towards the renovation. And I noticed the name of someone who was like, had a very recognizable name. And I remember soliciting that gift. And so for me, it sort of put the two things together. Here's all the efforts that I was putting in, channeling someone's philanthropy, and here's the tangible example of something that's not going to impact students for a very long time. And so that's sort of where I was like, I want to be in that. I want to be able to channel people's good intentions into creating a tangible impact, which is what working in the nonprofit space many is. And so that's how I ended up in nonprofit.
Accidentally. Nothing is by accident, Mariya. We know this. But I love it. It's one of those things, when people ask me, I was in the military for many years, and I was like, I called the wrong phone number, and it's true. I did. I was looking for a job with the city as a teenager, just for the summer, and a family friend gave me the number to call, and then, anyways, 14 years of my life, almost 14 years later, I left the military, but that is a really powerful story. Like, you put in the work, you started the project, you put in the work, you did the outreach, and now you're seeing the tangible results. And that's what people want, that tangible results. Now you have your own enterprise,
Mm.
and you're supporting nonprofits in this new way by equipping them with aligned staff who can properly support them. Why did you start this enterprise on your own? Because I'm feeling confident in, and I say this, you could have gone and recruited for bigger corporations. It may have been easier.
Um, I could have, but I really didn't want to.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't recruitment that was the main focus. It was actually impacting nonprofits that was more important to me. And
Yes.
the reason why recruitment is because it got to a point where I had a career, had successful roles, and I was getting promoted on a regular basis, etc. But I was always limited that I could only impact the one organization I was working for. And especially if you work in large organizations or you work in organizations where it's really difficult to see the impact short term because they're working on big problems that take a long time, um, it starts to feel a little bit, you feel a little bit lost because you're like, I really want to advance this cause, but am I like contributing enough? Do I have enough impact? Is anyone going to notice if I'm not there?
Mhm.
Um, and so I got the opportunity to work as a recruiter for an organization that had recruited me into a role a few years prior to that. I was like, this is one way I can help multiple organizations all at the same time. And so that is what excited me, is like, I don't have to just care about education or women's issues or healthcare or a local pet shelter. And, I
Mhm.
once recruited for a circus school, and that's probably one of my favorite recruitment stories to tell. And so I didn't actually have to stick to any one of those causes that I was passionate about. I could work on all of them at the same time, because if I can find them a leader that will advance that cause, then I've helped that organization move forward.
Yeah. Wow. Really good shift of perspective, right?
Mm,
And for you to get to that perspective, you have to go inward and really look at what it is that you wanted and how you're going to create that impact.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Which,
and I think it's also, the other piece to this is, I think, and I tell this people often when they start thinking about starting their own business or changing careers and whatnot. And not like, that's not to say that a nonprofit space is like super rosy and everything is
Mm,
perfect. That's really not it. But it also is about the types of people you want to spend your day talking to. And so I'm very privileged that I get to spend my time with my very talented team that's all nonprofit professionals, and they care deeply about the missions of the organizations that we work with. And then I get to talk to other nonprofit professionals that are passionate about the work that they do, or board members who are volunteers and sort of really care about the causes that they represent. And so I get to be in this space where nobody lacks motivation to do the work. That's not really it. And I think that makes the nonprofit space special. And it makes me motivated to work in it because I get to spend time with folks who are not there just because it's a job.
mhm. Yeah, they're there because they want it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you this now.
Mm,
Someone comes to your organization and they're qualified. Well, I'm just saying, they think they're qualified.
mm.
What is the process like when they come to your to the recruitment for staffing and say, Mariya, I wanna lead a particular organization, an organization for girls or something like that. Um, and I'm skilled. I have experience. What are the steps that can you please take us through the steps of your process of how you go about not only hiring but making sure that they are aligned with the right organization?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. And I would say by the time that someone comes to us with a background of, here's what I would qualified to do and I would like, do you have anything for me? Um, there's like a whole bunch of things that have to happen before that, which are equally important. So a common misconception about recruiters is that all we do is find candidates and maybe
Mhm.
interview them, right? But that's actually like 25% of the work that we do. Um, that's not to say that that's not where we're very skilled at, but a lot of the work that we do is before that on the organization side. So we need to talk to whoever the hiring manager or the leadership team is, or a search committee if you wanted to go more senior and formal, etc. We need to have a really clear understanding around what is it that everybody's looking for in a candidate. And I'm not talking just about skills. I'm also talking about cultural fit. I'm talking about sort of even simple things like how is this going to work with their lives? And like that during the pandemic became really important. And now there's still the battle of, is this role going to be remote? Is it going to be hybrid? Is it going to be in office? Is it going to work with people's lives? And like all of that. So there's that piece. And then the other thing that we do is we really examine the organization from all possible angles. Like we would talk to staff, we would look at their funding structure, we would look at sort of what does the market trend look like in their space to really understand where is the organization in this moment in time and where is it trying to go. Because depending on what that looks like, you may be the most qualified person on earth for this role, but maybe the organization is just not ready for you.
Mm,
And so when we say you're not the right fit, it's not so much that you're not qualified to do the job, is that what you're best at is not what the organization needs right this time. To give you an example, so leaders come in very different categories, but a good example, so like if you take me as a leader, I'm a fixer. Like I have a growth mindset. I like to take things that are not working and see how I can optimize them and improve them because that gives me the positive reinforcement that I'm advancing, right? And so if you put me in a position where this organization is excelling at everything and just needs someone to keep the ship steady and sort of fit in with the culture and not change a thing, that's not me. Like I may be very qualified as a leader and I could excel in a whole bunch of other spaces. That's not going to be one of them. On the flip side, if you have someone who is even keeled, takes the long term view of an organization, and you put them in a very small nonprofit that's very young and is trying to grow significantly and innovate, they're probably going to take too long and everybody's going to run out of patience. So different times in an organization's life cycle call for different kinds of leaders. And we got to figure out what kind of leader you are when you come to us. And do we have organizations that are looking for that? On top
mm,
of passion for the mission, on top of qualifications, on top of experience and skills, et cetera, right? That's, I think, is where things get interesting. Because those are deep questions that you don't see on a job description. And I would encourage people when you are looking for a role, you should be spending as much time interviewing the organization as they are spending interviewing you, right? So the job description is sort of like the tip of the iceberg. look like 3, 4 levels below. And the only way you do that is by talking to a lot of people and asking really insightful questions. Like the one thing that drives me nuts when people interview with me, and then I ask the question of, do you have any questions? And the only question that comes up on their mind is, when am I going to hear back? Well, okay, I understand why you're asking me this question, and I will address that anyways. But of all the questions you should have asked, that one is the least consequential when it comes to whether this is the right opportunity for you. I don't know if I answered the question right, but
Yes, no, you did. You did answer the question. You have me thinking now because it, I had a young lady on, and we did a few lives and everything, and we were talking about recruitment process for businesses in
Mm,
regards to HR. But now, when I'm hearing when it comes to the alignment, not only of the individual with the organization, and you're talking about the research that needs to get done or interview as you called it. Now I'm thinking to myself, the days of just showing up or filling out an application no longer matter. Like, not that it doesn't matter, but it's kind of gone. Now you have to be aware of every area of your life, the soft skills, the hard skills, the is this the right timing skills, can I fit in with an organization skills, and do I want to be here, like, in this organization. So would you suggest that someone comes to you and there's, okay, I would, can I be part of the team, so then you can connect me with an organization? Should they come with an idea of not only where they want to be, but like what sector should they be? Like, should they have a knowingness of it or an idea? Yeah, I hope I'm asking that question properly.
yeah. I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, right? So the clearer an idea you have about what it is that you're going after, then the easier it is for folks to like send you what you want as opposed to just flooding you with a whole bunch of opportunities, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, you also have to be a little bit open to possibilities because, as you and I have both discovered, sometimes by accident you end up in situations that are really, really good for you. And so you can't just have tunnel vision, be like, if the job doesn't fit my 3 criteria, I'm not going to look at it, right?
Mhm.
I think there's a lot to be said about organizational culture and being happy at work. That's not how much are you getting paid, because I know lots of people who are getting paid a ton of money who are super unhappy at their jobs, right? It's not even like, do you have to go into the office or do you have to work remotely? There's organizations like the most convenient job can still be just as toxic and a whole bunch of other things too, right? And you're just replacing one type of convenience for another, right? So instead of feeling good at being at work, you're feeling good about being at home and being stressed while you're on Zoom or whatever. So like you're still being stressed, it's just differently. Um, so I think that there's a little bit of there. What I have noticed though is that, so people want to do some of that self discovery in the recruitment process, and that's a waste of everybody's time. So it's helpful, particularly if you're going for leadership positions, right? So when it comes to being a manager or a director or an executive director, et cetera, it's really important that you take the time to figure out what you're good at, how you show up at the work, and what's important to you, what your personal values are. And most people don't do that. So things like leadership coaching are really important, like knowing what your personality traits are like, and asking for honest feedback from your mentors, and first off having mentors, right? And also getting some of that, like really investing in yourself and your skill set and understanding who you are shows up very differently in an interview, and sort of you get that confidence to really knowing what you want as opposed to being like, man, okay, well, I could try this out.
Mhm.
That doesn't work at the senior level roles.
Mhm. 100%. It's a whole different ball game. You have to actually know who you are. You got to come in not only with confidence, more importantly, competence. A lot of people don't have the competence to do the work that that's set before them, and too many people are lazy. They want these things, but then they become lazy at. So what you're doing is really sifting between, okay, how is this aligning? Where do you actually belong? You mentioned earlier 25 years, the nonprofit sector has kind of gotten
Yeah.
this spotlight, which is not very long, but nonprofit has been around since forever and a day. Um, how has it shifted, I would say, in the last 5 years? And where do you see it going in the
Mm.
next 5 years?
Well, I think that it really depends on the person, where they sit in this space, and who you ask sometimes. And for me, it's even what day of the week it is. Okay, so brief history of the nonprofit space. I think it's really important. And if you ever sort of want to check this out, there is a show on, I want to say HBO, called The Gilded Age. It's by the creators of Downton Abbey, and it's about sort of New York in the, I want to say, early 19th century. But and it's about high society and sort of what does new money versus old money look like. Anyways, there is an episode in it called "Charity Has Two Purposes." Like, one is to give, and I think this is quite literally, if I'm quoting this correctly, one is to give um, rich ladies something to do, and the other one is to give younger rich ladies an opportunity to climb the social ladder, right? And so that sort of is how charity was viewed for a very long time, that it was just something that wealthy people engaged in, right? That was one end of the spectrum. The other one had like lots of connections to religion and sort of how poverty is being addressed within that space, right? And so the professionalization of nonprofit space, as a space where we have issues and causes in society that are not best addressed by government, and they're not best addressed um, by businesses. So there is a space for these somewhat neutral parties that are neither nor, or they work with both, that can advance some of those issues, right? And I think that that's the view that nonprofits have taken for the last 25, 30 years, and that's why we see so many of them that have come up, is that, well, here's person X who has an idea of how can we address this, that there's a gap in this space, and instead of waiting for folks to figure it out, because government moves slow and businesses have their own interests, so let's like just move forward with it. So to give you an example, one great organization we worked with um, was founded by the father of someone who had passed away from, I want to say, leukemia. It was some sort of a childhood cancer, at sort of in his early teens, right? And what that father realized as he was going through this process is that there's the medical support that you would get when you have a child that has cancer, um, but there is no support for the caregivers and the families around that child. And so he created an organization whose entire role is to provide support to parents and families when they have a child that has a complicated medical condition. Um, that's not something that a hospital is going to do necessarily. They could partner with an organization like this, but that's not their mandate, and they're not set up to do that. And then what government agency is going to cover that? Um, and so, like, those are the kinds of organizations I think that when I think of nonprofits, that's what I think of. I don't think about a whole bunch of wealthy people donating, and I don't think about sort of trying to feed the poor, which none of like both of those things have their merits, but that's not really what I think of when I think of nonprofits. What we've seen in the last 5 years is sort of a lot of tension in our space of, like, are we actually accomplishing anything, right? Because a lot of the stuff that nonprofits do is like bold and lofty and complicated, and it takes so much effort and so many years to figure it out. And there's very few, so this is interesting. There's very few nonprofit organizations that have accomplished their mission. So the
Mm.
one that comes to mind is, for example, March of Dimes. March of Dimes was a nonprofit organization that was created to accomplish, the polio vaccine, right? And so that's like one. And then they moved on to a different mission, which was great. But that's like one. You know how many other charities there are of all kinds of, whether that's on the healthcare space or not, that have existed for 100 years plus. We're still working on the same thing. That thing may have changed in scope and whatnot, but it's still there, right? So you have to have a lot of stamina to be in that space. In the last 5 years, I think what we've discovered is that I think nonprofits are struggling with trying to get people to understand that we can't apply the same rules in the nonprofit space that we apply in the for-profit space. So
Mhm.
results are not going to be fast, right? We're not bottom line driven in the nonprofit space, like all of those things. But also, we can't expect folks who are wealthy and trying to invest in the nonprofit space because they really care about it, but they don't actually know anything about it. Like the power dynamics there are very different. And so there needs to be a bit of a shift so that education goes both ways. That doesn't always happen. On the nonprofit professional side, the pandemic was really, really challenging for the nonprofit space because need exploded in
Mhm.
many, like think of even just something like mental health, right? Like it really accelerated. And so there's many organizations that grew substantially because there's so much more need. There was also investments that came in, sometimes strategic, sometimes not. But there's a whole bunch of nonprofits experiencing growing pains, right? There's also a lot that struggled to adjust because one thing that the nonprofit space doesn't do really well is shift quickly and innovate, right? And that comes with because of the scarcity mindset and a lot of the times the way they're funded. But just switching from sort of being an in-office environment to a remote environment to back to in-office, maybe like all of that has caused a lot of tension, a lot of stress in the nonprofit space. And then whenever you have precarious economic conditions like inflation and sort of like what we saw with the salaries increases that happened in 21 and 22, for example, to sort of the dampening of things in 23 to maybe stabilizing in 24. All of that has impact on small organizations in particular for whom 5 or 10% less money raised means someone's not having a job anymore. And
Yeah.
so it seems like a small shift here and there, but it does have impact on real humans. And so I think that there's a lot of that going on. That being said, I think I'm also heartened by the fact that we are seeing, particularly women in philanthropy, taking a sort of the stage and trying to impact and doing it differently. And I really appreciate that. I work with a lot of organizations, for example, who've received funds from Mackenzie Scott. And it's absolutely amazing to get them to come to me and say, we finally got some money that doesn't have a ton of strings attached to it and we can spend it the way we think we need to, which almost always is investing in people, right? And I think that
Yeah.
that's
No, it's this is eye opening uh, for many people because the perception of the nonprofit world is skewed in a way because we don't a lot of people don't really understand it,
yeah.
right? And there is a huge need, especially not only during the pandemic but even after the pandemic. Now with everything else going on, a lot of people are going in these spaces because they need the support, and it can be good for the organization. But as you mentioned, if they're not prepared, um, they may not get that growth that they would need because they're not equipped, they're not prepared to handle it. And I remember years ago, and I'm on the board for a nonprofit organization, but continuously, and like I used to give and also fundraise before I had my own family. And I remember when I was in my early 20s and I was giving to other organizations, like financially, the monthly giving, people would say, "Oh, like they don't even use that money for to help the people. They're using that money to pay their salary," because there was this whole thing of how funds are being allocated, and I'm not sure if people's perception has changed much. I still continue doing it because I know what it's like to have to use the nonprofit organization, have to use the space, and I seen the value and the benefits when I was a child. Growing up, now I continue to give back. What are your thoughts in how people's perception, the public's perception, in terms of the allocation of funds? Because for some reason, I think people just think money just magically appears, even though they know they have to fundraise. But then, like, it's just a skewed perception. What are your thoughts on that?
This is, man, we could go on forever on this, but so there's a few things there. And I experience that a lot when I work with board members who are very well compensated in the corporate space, and then we have very tense conversations around salaries in the nonprofit space, and the argument of, well, this is the nonprofit space, people should not expect to be paid a lot of money, and they should just do it in like out of because they care. It's like, but because you care doesn't pay your mortgage, so
That's
we
right.
have to be mindful of that. And so
Mhm.
my answer to all of this is, um like, if you had a building that you were trying to heat in the winter, like at some point you actually need vents, right? So like, when you're like, do you think that that's a waste of money to have vents in a building so you can heat it and you can be in it? Like, it's not the bricks and it's not the windows, so like, what is it for, right? And I think that things like fundraising or administrative costs in general, that's the stuff that enables everybody else to impact the organization, because without it there will be no organization, there'll be no impact. Like it, and we have to be really, really careful, and that's really important to me, because if we continue to believe that people in nonprofit space don't have the same need to be compensated, we're doing two things. One is we're perpetuating poverty, because in many organizations, particularly those that service communities of color or generally marginalized populations, many of the folks that work there are also representative of those populations. And so by saying they don't need to be compensated as well, they're like one paycheck away from the people that they serve.
Mhm.
And so, like, are you really accomplishing anything, or are you just perpetuating poverty? That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of this is, if you have folks who can't afford to not take a salary or don't care how much they get paid, then you're really working with people who come with economic privilege because they're not the main breadwinner, because they're generationally wealthy. Doesn't matter what it is. But then you're doing the other thing where you're perpetuating white savior complex and, a whole bunch of other privilege issues, right? And so I think that when it comes to investing in your local nonprofits and small organizations, I will tell you this, and I've seen this many times because I read salary surveys out there. Like, the nonprofit space does not compensate a ton of money. Like, I will give you this example. So if you look at it as a nonprofit organization, take the largest one in the country, doesn't matter what it is, look at how much the CEO of that organization is getting paid, and then compare that to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company that's of the same size. Like, we can't expect nonprofit professionals that have responsibilities and run multi-million dollar operations to get compensated like 50 times less than someone who does that on a corporate side, right? And 25 times less is still fine. It's still 25 times less. But
Mhm.
I think that that's where there's a lot of misconception. Dan Pelota has a movie called Uncharitable that does a lot of that and explains it much more eloquently than I do when it comes to overhead in the nonprofit space, and sort of how that actually like ends up shooting us in the foot most of the time.
Yeah. I That was a really good explanation for sure, 100%. And it really brings it into perspective as well, because as I mentioned, like, people, they have misconceptions and they still don't fully understand. And then the people who are even going into the like in the organizations for support, they're assuming that the staff is well compensated, and then so there's all of these different misconceptions. So thanks so much for sharing that with us. How do you see nonprofit being more strategic in their approach, not only to in terms of bringing in with their outreach, but also with their funding? Because just, and of course, I'm a layman. I'm not as
Hmm.
involved as you are. Of course, this is what you do. But there must be a more strategic approach. What I've seen is some organizations, and the one that I'm on, the board of I'm on, the president, he's in business and he's an economics professor and all of these things. So he led and worked with the president and runs it. This is final year, but was running it kind of like a business, like how a business would do it, and taking that approach. So, based on your experience, do you see nonprofits going more in that business model, or are they going to kind of do like a hybrid? What's to come? I know you answered this a bit more and where it's going 5 years from now, but I just kind of want to understand the model a bit.
So I think that I think that there is, so the nonprofit space loves to do this every decade or so. There's like this pendulum that swings one way or another, right? And so there was like a whole thing about storytelling. We're not going to care about numbers and KPIs. We're only going to care about the story. So if you have a really good story about that one person you impacted, you must be a great organization. Forgetting that maybe you didn't do it in the most efficient way, and maybe you could have impacted 10 people instead of one, etc. And then we swung the pendulum the other way. And just like, we're only going to care about KPIs. And if you're like an organization that's funded by a lot of grants, you see this a lot where you have to fill out a grant application and they're asking you like KPIs for a whole bunch of things, right? Which, then you need to hire someone to just keep track of numbers, right? And that's not, but no grant will ever cover that position to begin with. So you end up in some of those conundrums. So I think that there is an opportunity to meet in the middle. I think absolutely that nonprofits can be more innovative, can take slightly bigger risk, I would say, and should be accountable a little bit more like a business would, in terms of like, are you actually accomplishing what you said you're going to accomplish on a regular basis, right? I think that's definitely there. But I don't think that we'll ever get to the point, and I've seen this from nonprofits and I've seen this in some nonprofit professionals. It's a much bigger issue in the large nonprofits where we're just having growth for the sake of growth because someone really wants to say that they've raised $50 million as opposed to 40, right? But is it really impacting people? Is it making things better? Nobody cares about that part. So we can't just grow for the sake of growing. I think there's an opportunity somewhere in there. I think what's really important to understand about, and going back to this question around fundraising, is that a lot of nonprofit professionals think like this. They're like, well, this is money that's given to me by donors, and I need to be accountable and make sure that I spend it in the smartest way possible. So I'm not going to risk a penny to try and do something different. And in doing so, then we are not innovative because different could be better. Yes, absolutely, it can flop, but it could be better too. And so, because there is no opportunity to take risks, I think that we stunt innovation, and we're not able to sort of be a bit more bold in the way we address some of those issues.
Yeah, so it's, and you mentioned this earlier when you're matching potential
Yeah.
staff with an organization, is it the right fit?
Mm-hmm.
Because you may be as qualified, but if they don't need a fixer or a storyteller, then it's not going to work. And so that makes a lot of sense in terms of where it's going, and there's a lot of knots to unravel as you're going along, and that's powerful. I want to ask you a question. Think deeply. It's going to be intense. Not that bad, no. What are your thoughts on how a leader in the nonprofit space should be consciously leading their team, the organization, towards their goals?
I mean, there's many different thoughts I have there. I think the one that's really important about leadership more broadly, whether in the nonprofit space or not, it can sometimes be a lonely space because everybody expects you to know the right answer to all the questions they have. Um, and leaders don't do a really good job of surrounding themselves with no people. They're really good at surrounding themselves with yes people, but not many leaders enjoy having someone who's going to contradict them all the time. And so I think that it's really important for leaders to find a way to get out of the lonely echo chamber that you can be in sometimes, where it's like you're just alone with your thoughts all the time, right? And sometimes you don't know the answer, and you need support, but there's no one to get it from. And so I think that creating a peer network or getting an opportunity to talk to other leaders who are in your space, and like creating more partnerships as opposed to like showing up and thinking you know it all because that's what everybody expects of you, like showing vulnerability, I think is really important as a conscious leader, so to speak. And then the other part of this is leading is not like you have it or you don't have it. Like, it's a muscle that you got to work on. So you need to invest in improving and always thinking of how you can be a better leader. And that's like what I noticed when I was working with a lot of senior leaders, is they get a point where they're really successful in whatever they've been doing. And when they get to a job that requires a new skill, they lose the ability to be coached and to learn something new because no one wants to say it to them. And I think if you approach it from a perspective of here's what I know and here's what I don't know, I think that is really important as a leader to be able to figure out what you're not good at, what you don't know, so you can surround yourself with people that can help you.
Wow. Now that's very good, valuable
Was that
information.
deep?
It was that deep. That's right. But it is because it's simple, but it is deep because we have to find that balance 100%. How can the audience get in contact with you? They're saying yes. I need to. Like I'm interested. I want to be part of this team. I want to connect with nonprofits. I'm in a point in my career where I'm looking to be an ED or a manager. How can we get in contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I live on LinkedIn, so that's probably a good place. Follow me on LinkedIn, follow Charity Search Group on LinkedIn, check out our website and get in touch. We do have lots of opportunities for folks to be part of our network or talk to us about their next career move. So I would say that's probably a good space. And if you are a person who is sitting on a board, or want to know more about how to contribute to the nonprofit space from a business perspective by volunteering and whatnot, always happy to chat about that as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Maria, for joining us
Um,
today. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Don't forget to connect with Maria. Follow along. Show your support because the life that she's helping today is our future for tomorrow. Have an incredible week, and I will see you all on another episode.